Welcome back to Rebel Movement Podcast. My name is Billie. My pronouns are they, them, or she, her, and I'm so excited that you're here. I gave a little bit of a sneak, not peek, but a sneakily dropped that last week's episode goes so well with this week's episode. If you haven't listened to it, though, it's okay. It's not a prerequisite. It's a whole different person. It's a whole different topic. But as you'll hear as we get into the episode, everything is so connected, and you can actually hear, I think, a couple of times where my mind is being blown. You can hear the pause, and you can hear, I think I name it out loud too. So I'm really excited to have this conversation and to share it with you with Shulamit Ber Levtov. It's such an important conversation, and I really think it's going to make a really big difference to everyone listening. I'm just so excited to share it with you. Before we get there, I just want to give a little reminder to subscribe to my newsletter, and that I also have another business called Move with Billie. And in it, I teach anti-diet, trauma-informed, queer safe movement, mobility, yoga, workout classes. And my main focus and the main work I do is helping people to heal from diet culture, helping them to heal their relationship with their bodies, heal their relationship with movement. I do a lot of this work one-on-one. So we help to not only set up a movement practice it's really tailored to what you need, and helping you with any kind of mobility needs or pain, like reducing pain. It's very, very tailored to whatever you need, whatever your life looks like. And we also go into a lot of, it's like life coaching, but diet culture, anti-diet culture version, and kind of unpack some of the leftover stuff from diet culture. So if that seems like something that you would love, you can find the link in the show notes to work with me, or just email me, info@movewithbillie.com. If you are a movement teacher, and you would love to know how to teach in a more anti-diet way, you can also reach out to me. And you should also subscribe to my newsletter, because there might be something a little bit special coming up. I'm not going to tell you what it is. You're going to have to just subscribe and wait to see what the surprise is. So let's get to the episode. I'm so excited to share it with you. It was such a fantastic conversation. Enjoy. Hi, welcome. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you. Do you mind telling people your name, pronouns, and a little bit about yourself?
Sure. What would I say if I did mind? What would you say if I
That's
did
a good
mind?
question.
Just busting your chops. So my name is Shulamit Ber Levtov. I'm the entrepreneur's therapist. So I support women entrepreneurs one-to-one to prevent burnout and preserve their peace of mind as they ride the emotional roller coaster that is running a business. Especially because we're in an era of relentless stressors, like that can make you feel like you want to kind of flip your lid on the daily, right? It's like things are so rough these days. I think support is important for everybody, but entrepreneurs are my peeps.
Mm-hmm.
And just in line with what we're going to talk about today, when I started supporting women entrepreneurs and when I started running my own business, I had to understand about money because I wanted this to be a viable and sustainable business. So I started doing my own work on money, and in the process of doing that, discovered the trauma of money certification, which I have, and the certified financial social worker designation, which I also have, because when I fell upon the trauma of money, I was like, oh, this is the missing piece in my work with entrepreneurs. Because not many people are comfortable talking about money, and especially not many therapists, but there are so many emotions tied up in money that it was like, oh, this is the missing piece. And so that's where I'm focusing a lot of my one-to-one work now, is on what we might call money mindset, but I would have a lot to say about that too. And when I'm not nerding out on professional type stuff, what I love most of all to do is to sit outside in my special place in the yard with the hummingbird feeder behind me, and Mrs. Hummy comes to visit while I'm sitting there, like over my shoulder. There she is, which is the coolest.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And I knit and listen to most often contemporary romance, especially by 2S LGBTQ++ folks. which is so fun to listen to.
Yeah.
Not the Harlequin romances of my youth. And I love to nerd out on feminist science fiction, contemporary romance, and
Oh,
fancy yarn.
oh yeah, fair. Can I ask what are some of your favorite books that you've read or that you've listened to? Whether like
Well,
the either
yeah.
of those
So
genres?
the one that really stands out is called One Last Stop. And I
I'm writing
can't
this
remember
down.
the author's name, but if you go on Audible, or I like Libro.fm,
Hmm.
not affiliated with them in any way, but I will say why I love them is like they're an Audible, but you get to choose what local bookshop your purchases support,
Oh, cool.
which is like really cool. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
if you search it on whatever even your library app, you can get audiobooks for free, right? One
Yeah.
Last Stop, which is without giving it away, it's a story of a young woman who bumps into somebody on the subway and becomes enamored of that person. And it's the whole story of their romance, but it's not like there's the idea of how trains travel through time.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh.
yeah, so I'm just going to introduce the idea that it's not by any means a straightforward romance. It's
Mm-hmm.
very complex. The character development is great. And it's very interesting how they weave train travel and timelines
Cool.
together.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put that on my to be read thing, and also love the whole idea of sitting outside with hummingbird feeder and listening to books and knitting and stuff. That's so nice. Might
It's
have to
heaven.
pick
It
back
really
up.
is heaven.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
that
something I
sounds
started
awesome.
during the pandemic,
Hmm.
when everything shut down and my mood was in the toilet, I'm sure like everybody else. And the things I was doing for my mental well-being that gave me the capacity to support clients with their mental well-being, like were yanked. I suddenly
Hmm.
didn't have access to all the things that I used to use. And I had to find something post haste. And that's what it ended up being.
Hmm. I love that. Yeah, I feel like the pandemic really got people a little bit creative with their with some new hobbies and
Yeah.
things like that. Oh, that sounds really nice. Do you sit on like a chair or a hammock?
Yes, I have a special fancy chair. At first, I had just a regular old plastic Adirondack chair from
Hmm.
Canadian Tire. But for my birthday last year, I had a hip replacement in September 2022, and I couldn't sit on hard things anymore. So
Hmm.
for my birthday, I asked for a fancy recliner, that's
Oh,
for the outdoors with cushions and all. So now I sit in
yeah.
my fancy recliner.
Oh, that sounds so nice. Oh,
It
I love
is.
that.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that. I just recently bought a hammock because I
Ah,
was um having a hard time and I was venting to a friend and I was like, I just want to oops, sorry, I hit the mic. I was like, I just want to sit in a hammock and read a book and like just be outside. And they were like, "Do you have a hammock?" And I was like, "No." Like, why don't you buy one? They sent me a link to the one that they bought that was like pretty inexpensive, and it was probably the best purchase I've made all year. I'm guessing. I can't remember all of my purchases, but
wow. Yeah.
yeah, it's really nice. I'll have to think about doing audiobooks and then I could do another thing with my hands. I haven't even thought
Yeah.
about that. It
Yeah.
opened up a whole new realm of possibilities for me. I'm really excited to talk about drama of money. I think I know that we obviously talked a bit about it before, but I can't remember if I don't remember if this is something. Oh no, I think I shared this in the podcast like years ago, which is wild that it's been that long. But money used to be something that really stressed me out. And I mean, it's still, I mean, we'll get into for entrepreneurs, I'm assuming, um, it's still as stressful and it's in a certain way, but not like it used to be. And it was something that felt like a little taboo to talk about, which I disagree with. And the more that I've learned about money, the more or the less stressful it's gotten
Mhm.
because I don't know if this is the case for everybody, obviously, but I feel like there's not a lot of education around money, or especially if you grew up, like if you were raised a woman, if you're like assigned female at birth, I felt like, especially in that case, you're not supposed to talk about money or you're not supposed to learn about it or whatever. So, um, and I've had this conversation, I mean, not to the extent that we're like going into their trauma, but it's come up with clients of mine, and it's come up with friends, and it's come up in so many areas that I was always like, hey, this is something that I wish more people talked about. So anyway, I'm very excited to have this conversation, because especially to hear the entrepreneur aspect of it too, because I can totally see how that might affect. Sorry, I hiccuped in the middle of my word, and now I can't remember the rest of the sentence. I can see how it would have an effect. We'll just keep it simple.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Well, the truth is entrepreneurs are humans. And so really it's not significantly different when we're talking about trauma of money for entrepreneurs than it is for them as a human being. But how we are as humans has an impact on everything in our business, right? The difference, I would say, the main difference is that there's more safety related activation in the nervous system and emotionally for entrepreneurs around money than there would be or could be for someone who has a salaried job. Because with a salaried job, there's a certain relaxation around predictability and money. Whereas when you're running your own business, there has to be like an appropriate vigilance, an appropriate attention to money that is greater than you would have if you had a salaried job. And that would be the one distinction. But because of that, of course, the greater vigilance, still appropriate, but more demanding, then has an impact, right, on your nervous system.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah, because it's something that's not, it's not predictable. Whereas if you're in a certain type of job, even if it's like part-time job or whatever, there's still a certain amount of predictability and a little bit more easy. I mean, this is dependent, I guess, but easy to say like, hey, I would like this many hours, or where you can talk to your boss and be like, oh, can I have a little bit more hours next week? Or, can I have less hours next week? Like you have a little bit more control. And not to say that you don't have control as an entrepreneur, but in some cases, depending on the field, it's not like you can say, hey boss, can you give me some more hours? It's like
no, but it is like I would kind of characterize it in terms of a pipeline, right? When you're employed, you're not responsible for bringing in the money overall in the business. And so the business, your position there as an employee, that gives you a pipeline to money. And so there's the predictability. There is the limit though. And that's why a lot of people go into business for themselves, because there are perceived limits on what you can earn when you're an employee. And at the same time, you without jeopardizing things can ask your employer for more or less or for different kinds of things, right? Whereas any change that you make in your business around that is entirely up to you, and you have to make it happen. And that's demanding.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
There is no pipeline except you. You're it.
Yeah. It's got a lot of pressure. I'm assuming this is, I'm assuming this is something that commonly comes up with like entrepreneurs, because I always find there's some things that come up, I've learned running a business, that it's I don't want to say, I'll just say it brings up things, being an entrepreneur, in a different way than not being an entrepreneur. And I think, sometimes I think it can be, I hate to use this word because it's going to sound a little cheesy, but it's like a gift that you can actually see the things, you can see a little bit in a different way how your brain is working, or how like your history is affecting you, kind of thing. And you can try to heal it, but it's like hard because you're faced with also the pressure of trying to make it work. And if you're in the first couple of years of running a business, or it's kind of slow growth, sometimes that's a whole other thing.
It sure is. Yeah.
I'm assuming from everything I've seen, at least, that this is a common.
Yeah. Well,
thing.
My overall area of expertise is in the intersection of entrepreneurship and mental health. And so I've done a lot of research into what are the mental health challenges, or what are the factors unique to entrepreneurship that would have an impact on our mental health. And number one is cash flow.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So where would it feel helpful for you to start with this? I feel like I mean, from someone who is not an expert, it feels like there's a lot of options. I don't know if there's one better place to start talking about like what makes money traumatic, or
let's start there.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So our life experience shows up in relation to anything that we're doing, in our past life experience shows up in us, with us, in our interactions with anything in life. And so let's say you've had trauma in your childhood or trauma in your adult life. The way trauma has a number of like dimensions that it will impact. And I won't go through them all, but one of them is cognitions. It changes the way you think about yourself and the world, about other people. And so those changes in thinking, you can bring that to money. So for example, the negative cognition that might come to you from about money from your past experience is, oh, I'll never make enough. There'll never be enough. That's just one very small example of what we call negative cognitions, which is applied to money. Around any kind of trauma. But then there's trauma and money. So for example, if you've lived in poverty, in scarcity, if you had to experience food insecurity, not only as a child, but also as an adult, a sudden loss of a job, bankruptcy, financial abuse is one of the elements that people will experience in abusive relationships. So any of those factors are considered traumas that are directly money traumas. And so those can also have an impact on how you relate to money in the future and in your business, right? But then like in a much larger way. So there are three aspects, right? There's the any trauma, money trauma, and then the world we live in, which is white supremacist, hetero, patriarchal, capitalist culture. So capitalism is an economic system, but it's also a philosophy, and it permeates our world. And under capitalism, which I'm using in short for white cis patriarchal capitalism, like the nightmare we're in. I'll just say capitalism for short. Under capitalism, money is tied to safety and worth. Right? Because money is how we ensure our safety. It's how we put a roof over our heads and food on the table. But it also has to do with having or not having money. And especially not having money in this culture, there's a lot of shaming and blaming around your worth or value as a human being. And so when your worth and your safety are constantly under assault, which they are on the daily under capitalism, that can be traumatizing. And I want to also parenthetically mention that the further away you are from a cisgendered, white skinned or white passing, middle class, educated, all the things that are markers of privilege, the further you are away from that, the more likely it is that living under capitalism is going to be traumatizing for you. And so all that stuff gets wrapped up. So let's say you never had any childhood trauma and you've never had any financial trauma. Regardless, living under capitalism has such an impact on people's worth and safety related to money that money's going to bring shit up for you no matter what. And that's kind of the quote unquote trauma of money landscape.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's so much more complicated than I feel like people give it credit for.
Yeah.
That just living under capitalism, and then with all of the intersectionalities of I mean, I can't remember how you worded it.
Systems of oppression.
The
cis patriarchal, white supremacist, capitalist. Whatever. Yeah.
Just this I don't know if you said hellscape we live in, or this shit hole we live in. I don't know. That obviously has an effect on money, but then also if you have trauma of money, or if you just have trauma where money was a part of it.
Yeah.
There's so much, it seems like such a complicated thing to unpack.
Well, no more complicated to unpack than any other, than unpacking how you're impacted by any other of the systems of oppression that intersect in your body, right? It's no more complex than they're all complex, is what I'm saying. Right.
For sure. No, that totally makes sense.
And
I guess I never thought of money. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
That's okay.
I guess I never really thought of money I mean, I don't think sorry, I'm getting caught up in my words because I'm having some realizations as we're talking. Like I knew that money was a tool of oppression, but I don't think I realized that it in itself is a system of oppression.
Yes.
My mind feels like it's yeah. What were you going to say before I interrupted you?
Well, let's just pause for a moment, because I'm noticing some color in your face, and I'm noticing also that I'm feeling a little breathless. And I'm imagining that if folks listening are putting 2 and 2 together and light bulbs are going off, it might be a moment also.
True.
So I'm going to take a breath.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome. And I'm going to pick up on what you said about money being a system of oppression, because that relates directly to what I was going to say. That our struggles with money are not about us. They're not our personal individual fault. Most of us who have struggles with money struggle with money because the economic system is set up that way. Well, I'm getting teary. Yeah, it's not our fault. In so many ways, it's not our fault.
Yeah. And
what makes it hard for us, when you were talking about not having any access to education, there's a really strong emphasis on financial literacy as the way to address poverty and to help people create wealth for themselves. Like, if only you knew better, you would do better. And I'm just going to say, wave the red flag of fucking bullshit on that. Because having lived in poverty myself, and having supported folks who've lived in poverty when I was working with support for single mothers, is what it was called way back in the day. And that was where my real understanding of poverty developed. And then I lived in poverty myself after that. And thank God, because at least I had the systemic awakening around poverty and money, right? But I'm just losing my, yes. So the idea is that if you know better, you'll do better. Just budget and you'll be fine. Well, like, what the fuck are you supposed to budget with if you don't have any fucking money? Like in Ontario right now on ODSP, in Ottawa, where it costs $2,000 a month just to rent a 1-bedroom apartment, and ODSP gives you, I don't know what, like 1,100 maybe.
Yeah.
Like what? Like, so that is one of the ways in which our money system and our thinking about money, so that when you reach out into the world, okay, I'm going to look at my money, I'm going to do better with money, I'm going to get help with money, and you get into the personal finance world that says, well, just budget, follow your budget, identify and don't spend more than you make. And I'm like, wanting to punch people out, because that is so blaming to the individual. And a woman who writes about this, her name is Dana Miranda, and her website is healthyrich.co. She talks about budget culture. Now, I'm sure that in your podcast and in your work, you talk about diet culture, right? And how diet culture sets up for us this standard based on, especially for women, white, cishet, female identified, and also privileged in terms of access to money and resources and good food, right? It sets up this standard, and all the prescriptions for how to be healthy rely on the assumption, first of all, that what's the word I'm looking for? Intentional weight loss works, and that's the way forward to health. And that you have access to money to buy all these supplements and all this so-called healthy food, and to work with a trainer and all that stuff, right? So translate that template over to budgeting and money. And everything that is presented in the popular financial education sphere comes from a place of privilege and assumes a bunch of prerequisites and assumes a standard that is based in privilege. And the sum total of which is, if you just budget, you'll do better. So that assumes that people who don't have money or who are in debt or have money problems is because they're willfully spending, just like a person under diet culture is willfully eating, right? It assumes that you're like lazy, undisciplined, irresponsible, all those things that we can say, that people say about, I like to use the word fat because it's a reclamation and an acknowledgement for me, that all the things that people say about fat people in food, diet, budget culture says about poor people and money.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely does.
So when you reach out for help, like talk about unpacking things, you reach out for help and you're further shamed and blamed.
Yeah. That's true. You're told that you're the problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so one of the very first aspects of the work that we do in trauma of money, if a person were to take the program, or if they were to work with me one-on-one, is understanding the systemic basis and the multiple layers of trauma, systemic, interpersonal, family, intergenerational, and I forget what the other one is, but there are 5 or 6 layers of different kinds of trauma that have an impact on us, right? And when we can unpack, this is called discernment. In trauma of money, we say decrease shame, increase discernment. And understanding the systemic things at play, you discern, oh, wait a minute, it's not about me. It's actually shit they've put on me. Mm-hmm. So it's not my fault. That decreases shame.
Yeah.
Right? So you might still, like, I don't know about you, but in diet culture, like I still suffer in my mind around my body's non-compliance with diet culture standards. I'm no longer seeking to attain diet culture standards, but I still live in a body that doesn't conform to the standard. And it's difficult. Mm-hmm. But at least I'm not abusing myself anymore around that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And similarly with the money stuff, like I don't have all the money in the world. God willing, I should have it. And so should we all have all kinds of safety, the kinds of safety and security and well-being that money can get us. We should all have that. But at least I'm not tormenting myself about that I don't have it and blaming and shaming and abusing myself.
Yeah.
Because I'm not living up to that standard. And that already is like a lot of breathing space, because with the shame, we collapse, right? A shame attack, like, I don't know about you, but for me, it's terrible. Mm-hmm. And I'll do anything to avoid it. And when I'm in it, I'll do anything to get out of it. And cognitively, we don't have the resources to kind of look around and go, wait a minute, what the fuck? And then kind of reorient and do the stuff that's going to support me. And so then I am prey to consumer culture and to advertising propaganda and to predatory lending, which I would include, there's a definition of predatory lenders, like the check money cashing, payday loan things. Oh. But in fact, like, for example, I'm with one of the major banks and they will often send me, oh, let's increase your line of credit. Let's increase your limit on your credit card. And like, if you're in a shame attack and vulnerable and don't have enough money, you're going to go, fuck yeah, and click the button because you need the money and you got to get out of the shame. Right. So decreasing shame is a real, and understanding what's at play there is like the first step, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
In the process of shifting your relationship with money and with yourself about money. Mm-hmm.
Wow, this is awesome. I am so excited. I feel very excited about this conversation. I feel like my mind has been blown a few times. I also, it feels like I planned this. I didn't, but when this episode comes out, I believe that the episode right before it is all about shame and diet culture. And it's like everything just like works out so well. So, I mean, it's about like the shame, like response in your body. I was with Piper and we talked about well, they mostly talked about the like how it shows up in your body, and this gave a couple tips for what you can do. And that was primarily as a response to diet culture. But I mean, you could probably use a lot of the things for this.
Oh, shame is shame is shame is shame.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Whatever they offered around how to work with shame applies to shame in any circumstance.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's just so interesting, like thinking about it in this way, because like with diet culture, because this comes up, I think I won't say with everybody, but with a lot of people, whether you've had eating disorders or you've been in diet culture, you can spend all this time healing. And this does, I think, with healing in general, but you can spend all this time healing and all this energy and unpacking everything and doing all the things. And then one day you try on a pair of pants that you haven't worn in a year and they fit differently. And then all of a sudden it's like, you feel like you're right back at square one. Yeah. It's a thing that comes up. I've had, with private clients, with group clients, with like friends, where this thought of like, I've done all this work, but now it feels like I have no progress because there's one moment. And the thing that I often try to come back to is remembering that, like, in speaking in terms of diet culture, it's a very well-worn path. It's something that you're told how it works. You're told what to expect from diet culture, that, this is, even though it doesn't actually work. It's a path that has so much to it. And when you leave diet culture, it's like you're making your own path in the middle of a very dense jungle where you're constantly, almost constantly having to remind yourself of these things, because there's advertisements and there's things in movies and there's things written on packages of food and it's everywhere. So it makes sense that sometimes you might, like suddenly appear on the old path, because of course you would. It's 100%. Like, yeah. And now that we're talking about it this way, now it feels like those moments I've had those moments still with money sometimes, where like, say a client cancels and I'm like, oh God. And I feel like right back to that place before. I mean, not that I'm fully healed with money. I feel like it's similar with diet culture. It sounds like it takes a long time, maybe, but it's just so interesting to think about it that way, that like, of course you would.
Yes, of course you would.
Wow.
Yes, that's so important. Of course you would. What's different for me, and this is just coming to me now about diet culture. What's different for me with budget culture is my relationship with myself. So that when the shame attack comes, I have tools. I have ways of being with myself. My relationship to myself and my shame is different. I'm no longer engaging in the shaming. I'm no longer buying what the shaming part of me is saying to the ashamed part of me. I don't buy, just like I don't buy rape culture bullshit, and I don't buy diet culture bullshit. I don't buy budget or financial planning, whatever culture bullshit either. But the pain still comes up because we're still living in those cultures. But my relationship to myself about those things is different. And one of the struggles that I've been having with my so-called recovery from diet culture is, why am I still having these attacks? But just in our conversation now, it's coming to me. Of course I would have those attacks because that's the world I live with. But what's different is my relationship with myself and my capacity to use tools to support myself so that I don't abuse myself anymore. And I think I used to be a trauma therapist. I don't do trauma therapy anymore. I work exclusively with entrepreneurs around the emotional load of money and business. But the trauma training that I have comes into play because trauma shows up anywhere and nervous system work shows up anywhere. A teacher that I really appreciate, he's passed away now. His name is Michael Stone. And he was a psychologist, a yoga teacher, and a meditation teacher, Canadian. Loved him, love his work. And he said, as healers, we don't have to be healed. Our value in healers is learning to be with our woundedness, because then we can support others in being with their woundedness. And really, for me, the key to this all is our being with ourselves, that the
Mhm.
healing never stops. The work of caring for ourselves in this hellscape never stops because we're in a hellscape. But I know how to be with myself in a way that doesn't further harm myself in relation to both diet culture and budget culture or money.
Mhm. I
That's the
really like
difference.
that.
That's healing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so important to, I feel like there's so many parts of this to highlight in our conversation as a whole, but I feel like that part's really good too, because there's this idea that I think extends further than I realized, that success looks like healed, period, done.
Yeah.
And I mean, before I was teaching, it was like a yoga teacher equals they have
Yes.
their
Yes.
shit together. And or when you're a kid, like adults have their shit together, or like if there's this idea that success means healed, done. And that's not how it works, especially because we're human and we can't ignore the hard feelings because they're important. And it's, I feel like exactly as you said, the ability to sit with your woundedness and help other people feel safe to do the same, such a huge has such a huge impact that I don't think we necessarily will always see all of the extent of. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree.
Wow. I love this conversation. I feel like I'm learning a lot. I just feel very it feels like a little bit of a weight off in a sense, knowing that, I mean, I don't know that I was aware of capitalism, of course, and I was aware of these systems, but not to the extent I think that we've talked about, that it is in itself a system of oppression, and the shaming individuals for it. Like, I think I was aware of those things because I've seen how people speak about poor folks or people who are living in poverty. But it's just so interesting to have this type of conversation about it, because um, it takes a lot of the shame off the individual.
Yeah.
Which, as you said, is like the first big step. So, speaking of, if we're speaking of as an entrepreneur, or I guess as an individual, how do I ask this question? Because I do not mean to ask this question and put the blame back on the individual.
No, but
if we have one of the examples you gave was this belief from potentially a traumatic history of like, I'll never make enough money. If someone is an entrepreneur, or they're just, going about their life, and that's a belief that they have from trauma, it's usually, just in case anyone's listening to this and you're like, I don't know if I believe that. It's often not like it's not like a explicit belief, I'm assuming.
Right. It's running in
more
the
of an
background
implicit.
there.
Yeah. Would having that belief then show up in a sense, in the case of like holding back as an entrepreneur, or like,
well, it's important to be curious.
Yeah.
To use a non-money example in my own trauma recovery history, and then I'll make the connection.
Okay.
When I was a child and some bad things happened to me and I needed help and I asked for help, and that the so-called help that came was actually harmful. Like, so in simple terms, in my family, if you were barfing in the night, just like a little kid, regular thing, I'm sick, and you called for my mom would be angry. And so we learned real fast, you don't ask for help because help hurts, right?
Yeah.
And then as an adult, how that affected me is I had this belief there was no help for me. I had to do it all on my own. And if I asked for help, it was just going to make things worse. And again, it wasn't an explicit belief. I know it now because, of course, I've been through my own trauma recovery and have had the opportunity to see this. But once I did the work in therapy, it showed me that I was blind to the help that actually was there for me. And I just was unaware because of my perception of the way the world is. And so similarly, like, here's an example. I had a belief debt is bad. Many of us have a belief debt is bad. As consumers, we have a belief that debt is bad. In my business, when I was running a group practice, I had that belief that debt was bad. I literally had like a terror response in my body when I considered, and I can still feel it now. You can see me, I'm offering myself some gentle touch because I can feel the nervous system activation. Debt is bad. It'll be the most awful thing if I get debt and can't pay it back. It means that I'm a shit human being, irresponsible, immature, all that kind of stuff. But what I needed in business, debt is a tool to leverage so that we can grow in businesses. It helps us cover the gap between the growth that's needed and the infrastructure we need to grow until the revenue comes in. Mm-hmm. But I didn't understand that. And so my belief that debt was bad meant that I never investigated ways to get funding for the business and tried to do it all myself. So one, the business didn't grow in the way that I wanted it to. And two, I didn't even consider, because a bank won't give new business money, and especially not women, and especially not therapy businesses. Like, traditional financing doesn't work, but there might have been many other options. And I know now that there were even then, but I didn't know it. I didn't see it. It wasn't there for me. Mm-hmm. Right. So that belief that debt is bad kept me in a box. Mm-hmm. But I didn't know that then. I only know it now, looking back, once I unpacked my whole money thing. So that's an example of how, yes, my money belief did hold me back in that business. But it's not like a woo, your mindset energy is negative, and so you're only going to draw negative to yourself. Yeah. Right? Our ways of thinking form our reality in this way. Mm-hmm. And so my reality was that I couldn't go into debt for that business, and there were lots of consequences for that. So that's an example of an answer to your question where it's not my fault. And at the same time, and that's part of the increased discernment, decreased shame. My belief about debt being bad is a systemic thing. Mm-hmm. And when I understood that it was systemic, I could have some compassion for myself and the things I did to survive at the time. Just like with diet culture, just like with trauma, where many of us in life have chosen behaviors to keep ourselves safe under the circumstances at the time that are shamed and blamed and judged by culture, or that we look back at ourselves and go, why did we do that? Like, what was the matter with me? Right? That we can look back and say, and understand and have some compassion for ourselves and some kind of forgiveness for the us in the past who did that thing. Mm-hmm. And so this insight will free up once you have an insight and an understanding. Like, if I ever now have a bigger business than just me, I will know now to ask different questions. But it's not my fault. And I'm not a bad person. It doesn't affect my value as a human being that in the past, my belief that debt is bad prevented my business from growing the way I wanted it to. Mm-hmm. Is that making sense? Does that respond to what you're asking?
Yeah, it totally does. I think that part's really important when it comes to healing from any types of trauma or any of these kinds of beliefs. I feel like it can be really easy to get. So there's how do I say this? There's a couple of points along the way where I feel like it could trigger back, come right back to the shame part of it of, you start to gain some of the understanding of maybe I'll give an example. I went through a period where I was recognizing that I was abused when I was in more than one way. But at this point, I was recognizing that I was emotionally abused as a kid. And it kind of gave me a frame of reference that gave a whole lot of compassion of that, I am not the problem, in quotes. I'm not the problem for all, all of the areas. This is what I was going through. And then there's this, there's a part where, not that it's this linear, but there's another part where then you can sort of see how some of your behavior, like how that may have affected some of your behavior. So for example, like I didn't feel like I was loved. So therefore I was seeking love from other people, and my standards for how I was treated were like on the floor. And if I there's a period of time there where you're like, you could easily go back into a shame spiral, like, oh, what's wrong with me? Why did I do this? Like, get really stuck rather than use what you learned. But like, of course I would have a hard time with this. Like, it makes sense. You would want to find it somewhere because it's a need. It's something that you need to survive. Just like money is, it's something that you need. And I guess that's what I was meaning, is that there's a couple of points here where it can be really easy to go back into the shame part of it. And I think that's something that I see, it happened with me when I, it's part of my recovery. And then, because of course it's complex and it's not linear and it's all really confusing, but it seems like with money, there's also that kind of potential too, where you're recognizing your, how the things you were taught and the things you experience might be affecting your choices, or might have affected your choices, or might have affected your perspective. And then we can get really caught up in feeling a lot of shame or feeling bad, or even to the extent of like self-hate or that kind of thing because of those things. But it's important to keep coming back to, I can't remember the phrase, the word you used.
An easy way to put it is, whose shame is this?
Ooh, I like that. Yeah.
Whose shame is this really? And that's the big question in trauma money, right? Whose shame is this? But we could also ask ourselves that in diet culture, when I'm feeling shame about my body, whose shame is this and who benefits from this shame? And we can ask the same thing in around money. Whose shame is this? And who benefits from this shame? And even survivors of childhood sexual abuse, we can ask ourselves, whose shame is this? Well, the shame belongs to the perpetrator, right?
Yeah.
And who does this shame serve? It serves the system that perpetuates this harm, that is invested in creating and perpetuating the conditions that allow this harm to occur. And that's all, like any kind of abuse, any kind of trauma, diet culture and money. The shame serves to perpetuate the harmful systems of oppression. And when we can remember to ask that question, whose shame is this? And you still might feel shitty, right? I'm not saying that all of a sudden it's going to be like, la, I'm freed from whatever is going on inside of me.
Yeah.
But at least, as I said earlier, at least I'm not shitting on at least I'm not adding to the shit pile.
Yeah, for sure.
And when I know it's not me, it's easier to ask for help.
Yeah.
Like to say, like to call a girlfriend. Like I have a couple of friends, we go back and forth on Voxer every day about money stuff, our money shame, our money struggles, our money brags. But if I didn't know enough to know when I was having a shame attack to ask myself, whose shame is this? Then I go, wait a minute. Okay. And then I get somebody to help me get my head on straight, just a friend who shares my values and my orientation toward money. Right. And that's whose shame is this? It can be a really liberating question. Again, it doesn't take the shame away in your body.
Yeah.
But it liberates you from the grips of that shame so that you can offer yourself care. Yeah. And the other thing I want to say about the things we did in the past that bring up shame, and we judge them by objective, so-called, in quotation marks, external standards. My position is, and this is one of my die in the ditch beliefs, that the only measure of our past choices is whether or not we are alive today.
Oh, yeah.
Because as trauma survivors of any sort, money, diet culture, rape culture, sexual abuse, all those kinds of things, domestic violence, all that so-called domestic violence, whatever we did at the time is what was needed at the time. Our organism's absolute best and most brilliant strategy to survive those very adverse circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that I'm alive today is the measure of the success of those strategies.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's
a
the
good
only
point.
measure.
Yeah. That's a very good point. I love that reminder as well, that there's things that you've had to do to survive. And it's not like I mean, maybe sometimes it's a conscious choice, but there is a lot of times where it's not, where it's your body and your brain just trying to protect you.
And even when we would call it a conscious choice, I would say, how much conscious choice do we have? Like it's a forced choice. Janja Lalich, who's one of the big writers on cult and coercive control, she talks about forced choice. And so people in cults, in quotation marks, believe they are free because they are able to make choices, but they're forced choices. The choices are limited. It's the illusion of choice. And I would say, I would extend that into this capitalist, cis hetero, patriarchal, white supremacist, that we think we are free because it appears we have choices. And so because we believe ourselves to be choosing, then we believe that we are free and that it's, the choice is our fault. But yet, when you say conscious, in quotation marks, choice, when we look at the conditions you were in and you were making that so-called conscious choice, what choices were actually available to you?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that you are most likely not exercising true free choice because of the world we live in.
Yeah. That's another period of time where my mind is being blown. Continue.
Yeah, it's another survival thing.
Yeah.
It's another survival thing.
Yeah. And it really, what you said a bit ago about the perpetrator of abuse giving you their shame. I don't know if you worded it that way.
Yes. Yep.
Also really struck me, because that's something that I've had to come sort of to terms with the help of a therapist, with healing from my own childhood sexual abuse. And that was one of the parts that was such a tricky adjustment, was recognizing that like the shame I had around it was not mine. It was theirs that was given to me. And it's similar if you look at diet culture and if you look at money culture, where it's like this, for diet culture, it's not like you're not born hating your body. You're not born feeling ashamed to exist. If you look at kids, some kids, I guess not all kids, but who are in a loving environment and they're not taught to hate their bodies yet, they just feel like they don't think about that kind of thing. They just feel like joy to exist. They feel joy to like splash in puddles or like whatever. It's something that's taught to you, whether it's usually it's a combination of taught to you from the system and then from the people in your life who also are in diet culture and that kind of thing. But it seems like the same for money too, where it's not, you don't have a lot of conscious choice and you're taught that money is worth, and if you don't have money, it's your fault, even though it's not. I feel like I just want to like gesture to like the world around us, because what the fuck? And yet we're still blamed for not having money, despite the fact that like, I feel like I'm going to hold back a little bit of a rant for a second, but like the price of food is astronomical and the price of housing is astronomical. People are not being paid nearly enough.
And never have been.
And never have been.
Yeah.
And yet it's still our fault as an individual, not like corporate America and Canada or the system itself. No, it's us. I'm saying that sarcastically, just in case anyone doesn't get that. I'm not saying that it is our fault. I feel a little bit of
laying out the logic of the system.
Yeah, exactly. Laying out the logic of the system. Wow. I am so grateful for this conversation. Thank you so much. Is there I don't mean to cut it off, but if you have anything else that you wanted to put out there or say before we.
I think in summary, our big message today, you've said it, I've said it, is that there's nothing wrong with us. There's nothing wrong with you who's listening. There's nothing wrong with you, Billie. There's nothing wrong with me. Right? There's just nothing wrong with us.
That's a beautiful place to end. Thank you.
Thanks, Billie.
Do you want to let people know where to find you?
Sure. My what I would really love is for folks to subscribe to my newsletter, which is at my website, shula.ca/newsletter. Shula is spelled Shula. And if you want to learn more about me, you can just take a spin around my site, shula.ca. I do a lot of long form blogging. And so a lot of what we've talked about today is laid out in a variety of different posts. So you're welcome to check me out that way.
Awesome. And if there's anyone listening while you're like driving or anything like that, I will put the link below so you don't have to worry about like remembering this till you're done or whatever. I'll put all the links below. I will also name any of the resources or people that we talked about, I think, in the show notes.
Yeah.
I think I've got them all down. So just in case you're wondering, or you're like, oh shoot, I forgot to get a paper and pen, I don't have this, I will write it off for you so you don't have to worry. If you have any questions, I guess I usually say this in my outro part, but if you do have any questions or feedback or, you know, other areas where you want more, like to learn more about, you can send them to info@movewithbillie.com. It's BILLIE. Or I think on Spotify, I don't know if it's on all of the platforms, you can scroll down and put like in a little question box there. And then I will make sure that it gets to Shula as well. And I mean, if there's a lot of questions or if there's requests for future things, I can of course get in touch and see if there would be an option to come back.
We are for sure going to talk again. Yes.
Perfect. Yeah.
And I would be delighted to continue the conversation either this way or in the comments.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. Thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed this conversation. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Billie.
I'm so grateful for that conversation. As I'm recording this intro and outro, we had just had this conversation. And I feel like I'm still absorbing it. I'm still sitting with it. I feel like the way that I look at money is so different now from the beginning of the conversation. And I hope that's the case with you too. And I don't know about you, but the end where she's like, it's not your fault, there's nothing wrong with you, it felt like a big moment. It felt like I teared up. I think that she also teared up a little bit, or she felt it. It was huge. And I feel like that's such an important theme. And I just really want to highlight that part, that if you leave with nothing else, I feel like you're going to leave with a million different amazing things. But if for some reason you leave with nothing else, leave with that there's nothing wrong with you. So good. As I said before, I put all the links, I put all the names of the people in the show notes. If you missed them, if you want to head back, or if you want to check them out, if the trauma of money training sounded interesting to you, Shula wanted me to let you know that she does have a coupon code for that training. So you can reach out to her directly via her website. Or her Instagram, I think. I think that was all the things. Everything else is going to be in the show notes. So excited that you're here. If you could take a second, rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast, I would just love it if you would even rate it, give it a little star rating. I think it's a 5-star, but I'll let you decide. And then take a screenshot, share it on your social media, and tag us, because I personally love knowing who's listening. I love knowing, putting faces to the numbers I see. And I also it just feels really nice to hear when people listen. I just got an email the other day from someone who listens, and it was the nicest email. It was someone who's in my book club. And I am still it was yesterday that I got it and read it, but I'm still feeling the I don't know, endorphins. I'm just still feeling excited about it, and I still feel really grateful. So don't underestimate how much that kind of thing helps helps me. I also want to make sure that I send a thank you or name that Elise is the wonderful human who does the transcripts, and I absolutely am so grateful for her work and for her. And if you are wanting to support this podcast, if you love what I do, if you love these conversations and you want to support this podcast, this project to continue and to keep having these conversations, I would love it if you consider leaving me a tip. If you go to the show notes, there is a little option, leave me a tip or buy me a coffee. It should say one of those two things. And you can actually now set it up so that you automatically tip once a month. If that's something that you want to do, if it's something that resonates with you, I think it's like a minimum of $3 Canadian. I could be wrong. There might not be a minimum. I think it might be $3. Anyway, go check that out. I'm so grateful for you for listening. I'm so grateful for those of you who do support financially or do choose to support financially. And I'm so grateful for those of you who share that you're listening and who send me those emails and send me those messages. You're amazing. And I appreciate you way more than you know. So I will see you next week. Thanks so much for being here. Bye.